Welcome, guys, to episode 6 of the Hidden London Hangout. We have a corking location for you today. I only apologise that we are still in the middle of lockdown. I can't get to a barber and my hair is all over the place. I am trying everything to keep it in position so it looks okay for you guys. It's a problem for all of us. I don't do this alone. I've got an amazing group of people to help me through this wonderful location, and indeed all of our Hidden London Hangouts. First one is Chris Nix from the London Transport Museum. How's your hair doing at the... Oh.
It's great, thanks, Alex. Yeah, I've obviously had the barber to work as well. Yeah,
must take hours. City Holloway, how are you and how's your hair?
It's growing quite rapidly. I keep it plaited most of the time, so these fancy sort of 90s curls just are a regular occurrence in my house now.
I have to say, your kiss curls did incredibly well in a previous episode of this. The boys and the girls all loved it. And Laura Hilton Brown, how is your hair looking today?
Well, I hope it's all right. I hope everyone's
Gorgeous.
feeling all right, and I hope everyone's well as well.
We're all doing okay. And today we've got a guest because our location requires us, I think, it would be really remiss of us not to have an expert on posters with us today. And I'm delighted to say that if you've got the Hidden London book, this is one of the guys who co-wrote it. He's also a poster art expert. He's a historian. And he's an all-round good egg. And he's got the best beard in the business. David Bownes, hello.
Hello.
You are looking awesome. Does it take a lot of work to keep that, you know, looking splendid, that beard?
Well, I'm disappointed you didn't ask me about my hair. I mean, I didn't have a beard before lockdown. But,
did you really? It's all grown since.
We all need to get to the barber.
It's really bothering me a lot. I thought, should I have a go and cut my own hair? But to be perfectly honest, I thought these hangouts are going to be here in perpetuity. And if I make a bad job of it, I'll never live it down. Now, today's location, I want to get straight onto this because frankly, talk of hair is nothing compared to where we're going today. I thought, should I whip out my Johnson? Or should I show you the blue and cream mug? And I've gone with the blue and cream mug because it is the tile work of our location today. It is Euston, a station which is known now for 2 tube lines, a phenomenal mainline station as well. But the history beneath our feet is on another scale, and it's layered as well. And today we're going to unpick that. So first, Laura, it's one of your favourite locations as well. Paint us a picture of the mood that is beneath our feet in those tube tunnels. Many of them are now mothballed and derelict.
So Euston is, Euston's a great venue. It's like a little treasure trove. There's a lot going on there. And when I first worked with Chris and Siddy on the tour down here, I didn't know that there was so much. And when you start to unpick it, it's really quite exciting. What I want to do now, if it's okay, is just play you a short clip because I think that it will just take you there and help you understand a little bit more about the venue. And then I'll just chat a little bit at the end, if that's all right. So operationally, Euston's been quite challenging for us. We have had to kind of roll with it a little bit, but be quite flexible and adaptable. There's a lot going on up there in that area. And I think we're going to cover that kind of later on in the hangout as well. But it just means that our start point and our route has changed quite a lot. But what we've tried to do is keep those really, really lovely themes of expansion, adaptation, innovation, connectivity, you know, linking London with the North in the tour. So you have these lovely stories, but visually it's really, really exciting as well. And I know Siddy's got some great slides that are coming up later, so I don't want to kind of go into it too much. But it's exciting because of the colour and the symmetry and the tiles. And you don't even have to be into all of that. It's still really, really exciting. And I think that's why Euston is kind of, you know, up there at the top.
It totally does it for me. It's one of those places where, depending on where you are on the site, you're in a completely different time warp. You could be at 1907 when the station the stations were first opened. You could be in 1969 when the Victoria Line came. You could be in the middle of the war, World War II. There are so many different artifacts within there that are all just glued to the wall or in location, and it is fantastic. Chris Nix, we do this every week. I want you just to take us back to 1907, when that particular area of the London Borough of Camden got 2 stations for the price of 1.
Oh, thank you, Alex. Actually, I'm going to take you back even further than that. I'm going to take you back to 1837, when the reason for those tube stations eventually coming along was built, and that was Euston mainline station itself. That was built as the London terminus of the London and Birmingham Railway, and it took a while before it got a really close tube connection. The Metropolitan line, of course, built Euston Square station, but that's a fair walk away actually from the front of the mainline station. And so, yeah, it took until 1907 for the first of the tube stations to go there. That was an extension north of the City and South London Deep Tube, which, if you remember, was the world's first deep tube railway from Stockwell to King William Street. They'd pushed forward north, and Euston was its new northern terminal station. And then, I mean, they got there in May of 1907. Second in the race was the Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway, now the other branch of the Northern Line. And that didn't make it there until June. So they were just behind. And they each built a station either side of the original entrance to Euston Station, which is a bit further back from the main road than it is today. There was also a third shared entrance that they had in the mainline station itself, which, although that was the smallest one, was actually the most used one because it was actually in the station and most convenient to get to. So remarkably, after 7 short years of operation, those 2 underground stations were closed. They only had 7 years of life, and it was that third mainline station entrance that was the kind of the winner, if you like, for the one that was most used. Now, that carried on until 1922. The City and South London Railway needed to expand the bore of its running tunnels to be the standard size that is now used on the tube. They had really tiny tunnels, having been the world first, and so they broadened out the width of or the diameter of the tunnels over a 2-year period from 1922 to 1924, and they actually did that while still running trains through the tunnels during the day. Somewhat remarkably, they were working at night to expand it. And that really takes us towards the first development in the station, where I think we should probably pause, see some photos, talk about some other things, and then pick up the next phase of its operation.
You're good. They don't need me anymore. This is amazing. They can talk themselves through this. So basically, the history lesson so far, Euston Station is served by 2 separate companies. Okay, you've got the City and South London Railway, which is now known as the Bank branch of the Northern Line, and at the time that terminated at Euston. Okay, an island platform, 2 tracks, and that was the City and South London Railway, the Bank branch. The other company, the Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway, is the Charing Cross branch of the Northern Line now, and that had 2 separate platforms and was served by the Leslie Green building above ground, the red one, okay? The City and South London Railway was a nice white and green one that was a bit further along. So here's where we are at the moment. Then the 2 companies merge to make a more unified line, but the trains were different sizes. So the Bank branch had to be redug and made bigger so that everything looked the same and trains could run on both of those branches. I think you've heard enough chalk and talk. Let's have a look at some pictures. City Slideshow, episode 1.
Here we are. So, welcome to Euston, everyone. Now, this photograph is from Euston Station in 1904, but as Chris said earlier, Euston was the first intercity railway station in London. It connected London to Birmingham, and it opened a month into Queen Victoria's reign in 1837. So it was really kind of a pioneer station, often known as the gateway to the north. And what I'm showing you there is the Doric Propylaeum, or the Doric Arch of Euston. Now,
it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous.
I really wish that this still survived, because it would just be such an impactful sight when you walked up to the station. Unfortunately, This arch was demolished in the 60s, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on and where it ended up. Now, as you said before, if we go all the way towards 1907, we've got the two different lines coming to Euston, because of course, being such a big railway station, you know, they expect it to be a very lucrative business to actually be able to connect Euston into the rest of the city. So the first station was the Sidney Smith designed City and South London station, which was on the eastern corner. If you're looking at sort of Euston, right from the road, Euston Road, it would be on kind of your right-hand side.
Seymour Street, wasn't it? Was that right? Seymour Street?
Seymour Street, yeah, exactly, yeah. And isn't that's such a beautiful kind of, it's got loads of Victorian kind of glimmers to it. I don't know, it's that kind of very large tiles and it's very ornate. It's
yeah, very.
And very different from the other station that opened only a month later, which was the Hampstead Tube. Now that's a design we've talked about before, much more kind of one that we all recognise and identify with the tube.
And I love it as well. It's so beautiful because it was they're metal construction, aren't they? And then tiled on top.
Exactly.
Just it's stunning.
I mean, it's a brilliant, like, you know, something that we don't really think about, but, you know, the steel frame structure, because it's so commonplace now, we just think of it as, you mean, that's how you build anything, really. But in those days, it was something super innovative. And it meant that you could build on top of the building and therefore earn more money. But as you can see in this photograph, that never actually happened. Or, well, you will see in the latest photograph. Just to the side there, do you see on the right-hand side, there's just a glimmer of the substation that was built next to the station, and that provides electricity for the line.
That's right, amazing. So that was that, and I suppose that was the only substation, or were there others for the Charing Cross, Euston, and Hampstead? Was it just that one, or do we not know?
I think there would have been others. I'm not entirely sure. Chris, are you aware of others?
Yeah, substations had to be dotted around all over the place, and the Underground even had its own generating power stations. So yeah, there were a number of them, but that's a particularly handsome one. They're not normally that good looking, and it was designed to blend in to some extent with the building next to it. We have
Everyone loves a gorgeous sub, don't they? I love the fact, by the way, that the Northern Line had lots of places to plug in. Because I suppose if you didn't have a load of sockets, then you wouldn't be able to keep the trains running, which is lovely. That's a beautiful picture, though, City. Well done.
There you go. Now, this is a photograph of the island platform at Euston.
Wow.
It's a little bit later on, this one.
That is gorgeous. Absolutely stunning. I mean, that's Euston. Right, so just to put that into position, this is the southbound platform of the Northern Line Bank branch. Okay, correct. That's what we would know it as now, yeah?
And those who know their Euston will know that that platform is particularly wide, and that's something we'll come back to a little bit later on. But there we can see what the Melton Street building looked like back in 2018. And you just see that substation to the right there. They tried to kind of make it a little bit uniform with the station so it would fit in nicely. And it's one of my favourite sort of bits of kind of maintenance architecture, if you will. So, you know, not just build it but make it look a little bit beautiful. I think that's quite amazing.
Beautiful.
Now, the amount of cones and all this stuff that you see around the stations, because it's actually due to be demolished as a part of High Speed 2 coming to Euston, something that we'll again come back to a little bit later on. Now, as you said before, there are some amazing relics down in the tunnels because, of course, these were two separate companies operating from the same location. And quite quickly, they decided, well, actually, it's more beneficial for us if we work together. And therefore, there was this interchange ticket window in the passenger tunnels beneath the ground. And we only really know about one other site that had this, but that ticket window doesn't survive there anymore. So it's a really, really unique thing that you can only really see at Euston. I'm
going to say, because this is very, very uncommon to have a ticket window at platform level. And just to put this in geographical context of where this is in the station, if you imagine those two different lines, the Bank branch and the Charing Cross branch as it is now, there was an interconnecting tunnel to link the two. But because at one time it was private companies, you had to buy a ticket to travel on the other company's trains. So you could do that at platform level, couldn't you, Siddy?
Exactly. Yeah. So if you say we're coming down from Hampstead and you needed to go to Bank, you would have to interchange at Euston. And so if you did that, you came through that window, you'd come to the one that says in, buy your ticket, go down to Bank, and then, I mean, I suppose, go the outside and go to the other trains that would take you to Bank.
So hands up, who's got a photograph of themselves in that booth? I certainly have.
I think we've got quite a few of those, yeah. Right, let me then take you a little bit further on. So as you were saying, Alex, there were two interchange passages between the two lines. One, there was a direct link between the Hampstead line and the Bank line, and another that led to lifts that would take you up to the main line station, that third entrance that Chris was talking about earlier. Now, if I do this, you start seeing what that looks like. Now,
that is sensational.
Well, people have to remember, as with many hidden London sites, as soon as they close, we try to utilize all the space that we can on the underground. You know, no tunnel is ever left untouched, in a sense. Right. And so here you can see there's a lot of equipment actually being stored in Euston that helps with the maintenance of track during engineering hours, which is at night time when the tube closes. And you can just see some of that stuff stacked rather neatly to the side, I would have to say.
Yeah, very much better than my broom cupboard under the stairs. And David, you'll be delighted to see the remnants of some of those posters that we're going to be talking about a bit later on. And I think for us, the wonderful thing about Euston is that there are so many of those posters still stuck on the walls. So we'll come to David's poster gallery a bit later on, but that's a beautiful picture, Siddy.
Just talking about posters, this is one of the remnants down there. So just to give a bit of context why those posters are there, those passenger tunnels were actually in use until 1962 and 1967 respectively. And so you've got this brilliant, almost kind of time capsule, because essentially they just close the doors and let all of the posters that were advertising from the 60s just stay on the walls. And so you just get this brilliant glimmer into what passengers in the 60s would have seen on their day-to-day commute. And this particular photo is shot by Laura's husband, Gavin. So Laura, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I love this poster. So, I mean, just look at that pop of neon colour that still exists. And this is like from the 60s, like Siddy said. So this poster is phenomenal. The colour, I mean, for me as well, I'm really into film. So it's an iconic film. It's an iconic poster. I mean, Hitchcock, I think this film, it changed the landscape of screen thrillers. And there it is on the tunnel wall and, in Euston. For me, that is phenomenal. And every time I go on this tour, I go down to Euston, I have a little moment stood in front of that poster. I genuinely love it. And I just think the colour, and that it still exists, and like Siddy said, it's kind of frozen in time. This whole tour, it's like the door opens, and you kind of step back in time. It's just phenomenal.
And it's an era of history that people of my age can relate to. It was within grasp of our lifetime, and that is why I love it. The other thing that I can't get over is when the guy with the broom and the bucket of glue was putting that up on the wall. I wonder if he ever clocks that he was creating a museum. It's just such a phenomenal moment when we see David's posters and the sort of ones that are up that you see down there, which are just preserved for our delight and amazement.
One of the things that's always amazed me is because there's no daylight down there, the colours stay so vivid. And I've always wondered, maybe David, you could answer this. Did they use any different type of printing back then that made the colours so vibrant? They seem to be almost more kind of luminescent than...
Vivid, aren't they?
For underground posters, you were able to use more sort of reds and also some sort of what we call psychedelic colours today, because there was less daylight. So if you were posting this stuff out on the hoardings in the street, you had to be more careful. Red in particular isn't a very good colour for sunlight. So you really do get a vivid look on these underground posters.
I love this. Is it great? We've got a poster expert today. I don't think we've thought this through.
So
I know.
Alex, I do need to mention. Sorry, Siddy did mention that it was Gavin, my husband, that took this picture, and rather than me just kind of taking him on a jolly down to Euston, he was part of a team of guinea pigs that we took down to Euston to trial a photo tour. We get a lot of customers asking for different types of tours. And a photo tour is obviously high up on that list of what people like. It's not that they're not interested in the narrative, but there's such amazing visual, stunning kind of things to take photos of. And we had a photo tour of Euston, and it was really, really popular. And this is actually one of my favourite shots. I always think it looks like the inside of like a whale's tummy. But I think Euston has so many phenomenal visual things to offer. So the photo tour did really well.
I'd love the idea. Have you ever been to a whale's tummy?
No, but that is what it would look like if I was in one.
Oh my goodness! I never realised that the whale's tummy was built so long ago. That's beautiful. But thank you very much. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Amazing photographs, Siddy. Well done.
There you go. Now, I just wanted to ask David quickly about this one, because it's one of our prized possessions down in Euston. It's the Midland Pullman train poster that I think it was the first time we ever took people down there, and it was the patrons of the museum that we took down there, and one of our patrons stopped sort of dead on and went, "That poster would be worth so much if you could somehow get it off the wall." Was he right?
Well, sort of. I mean, it's a very well-known poster, but it is really magical to see it in a location, because the ones that have survived were, of course, ones that weren't put up, and they're in very good condition. But here it is, actually up. And this would have been put up, I imagine, in about 1960, after the Blue Pullman was launched. It is a well-known poster. It's by a guy called Walton Tone, and he was very good at doing these literal depictions of trains. And this is a very modern diesel Pullman replacing those steam trains in the 1950s. It's a real symbol of modernity, and great to see it in situ.
Isn't it just lovely as well to see the tile work? And it's when you look at that, you can see on my mug, I've got blue and cream on my mug, and you can see the blue and the cream on the walls at Euston. And as a tile geek, total tile fanatic, I just love this. There's a bit of me that would love to clean up there, look at that as well. I'd love to look, get a cloth to that and clean it all up, but I know I'd be ruining everything if I did.
There you go. So those are some of the posters of Euston. We've got another slideshow a little bit later on in the...
Brilliant stuff. So let's proceed with history on this one, because thank you very much for that visual delight. I love that. But like many of the tube stations that are on the London Underground system, they had a role to play during the Second World War. And Chris, just tell us a little bit more about the role that Euston had, because it wasn't just for civilians, it wasn't just for punters. It actually had quite an important role, a bit like Down Street, really. Yeah,
Euston was a really interesting one, because when we first started looking around it for tours, it hadn't been one that had been looked at for tours before. I think it was perceived as somewhere that didn't have very much there. And the first time we went to have a look at it, now 5 or 6 years ago, I was struck by the fact there was a lot there, but perhaps it just wasn't very well known about. And I'm really proud of Euston, because it was the first one where we really had to work to create the tour there and to be able to physically unlock a lot of the spaces. And one of the key spaces was, you saw just now, the whale's tummy shot is the bit that leads towards the vent shaft for the Victoria line. And it was that bit which we thought, crikey, we're going to have to do a lot of work physically to make it safe to take people down here, but the prize of going down there is really worth it. What we didn't realise at the beginning is that we were walking through another piece of history without even realising it. There is a doorway that has been filled up with concrete in the first passageway that you go into, and that caught my attention the first time I went in there. I thought, I wonder what that is, what the story behind that is. And the answer is related to this corridor that you walk through, which we had wrongly thought was part of the Victoria Line build for the ventilation shaft. Turns out it was actually built in 1937. and it was built by London Transport for the London Midland and Scottish Railway. Now that seems a bit weird. Why, at the bottom of the lift shaft, would London Transport build a mainline railway company a short section of maybe 20 metres of tunnel? And the answer is they built them a secret hardened telephone exchange. So we talked about Down Street last week, last week, and how that was running the nation's railways through telephones. Well, actually, one of the backups for that was at Euston with LMSR's own telephone bunker in that first bit of corridor off the lifts that was created specially for them.
It's amazing. And how many people would have been down there during the war?
Well, quite a few. We know this because they had to be given concession tickets so they could, by London Transport, so that they could go in and out of the station without having to buy a ticket. But it wasn't a massive facility. You probably would have got about 15, 20 people in there comfortably. But as well as those people doing war service, there were also shelterers there. And Euston was one of the stations which was used for wartime shelter for civilians. The conditions there were pretty dreadful to begin with, and indeed Clementine Churchill, Winston Churchill's wife, visits there early on in the war and wrote to Lord Ashfield, the chair of London Transport, really tearing him off about the conditions and saying, you know, this ought to be better. And he wrote back saying it would be sorted out, which it was in a few weeks. They sorted out the toilets and the medical bays and so on. So it had quite an active life during the war use. And again, this wasn't massively known.
She was a good tearing off is great. I must admit, the comments about the latrines made me laugh because she particularly disliked the fact there was no dividing wall between the latrines down there. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, it's bad enough that you're sitting on a bucket with some chemicals in the bottom of it. Much worse that there aren't even any privacy screens. And yeah, I think it is. It is a sign that you know, London Transport didn't ought to have had to be providing shelter for civilians, and it was just the fact that people had rushed there in numbers as the, you know, one of the few safe places that they could instantly go, and they had to scramble to improvise to create better conditions. So it wasn't really their fault that they ended up in that situation. It's good that they did then respond though and make the conditions better.
I do remember actually. I think. Just on the fact that the how many people were in that control room, I think I remember reading a memo that issued about 50 tickets. Obviously, everyone wouldn't be working at the same time. And then later on, people were banned from sleeping in the interchange passages because there were so many soldiers going through there in 1944, going up to Euston and then further out into the country. So we have that in our collection somewhere, which is a notice saying shelters are forbidden to sleep here to make way for military personnel.
It's incredible, isn't it? It's absolutely incredible. I'm going to have a little swig out of my Johnson. Siddy,
Alex.
I think we need... sorry, Chris, what was that?
Alex, just before we move on, I've got this little booklet here called Railway Posters and the War, which is produced by the Railway Gazette. And appropriately enough, if you look at the cover, it's edition number 2. So
good.
This has got just flicking through it. This has got a thing about the Underground trying to say. This is a poster with the Underground trying to say that stations must not be used as air raid shelters.
Isn't that great? Didn't they do well with that? Oh my goodness. Right. Okay. As you can tell, there are some things that happen, and I don't know about them, and it's half the fun. Siddy's secret slideshow. Show me some places that others would not normally see. Right.
Can you see the G?
There it is, Chris, isn't it? That's there.
Yeah. There are.
You can spot the G.
Euston's quite unusual. We talked about this in Down Street where there's one. But in Euston, there are actually a number of spots that have G's in them. I think there are a total of 7 if you can find them.
Wow.
Is that right?
So again, appeal to our viewers. If you do know what this means,
leave a comment below. I'm so sorry. I'm so remiss. My admin today is all over the place. First of all, you can follow Siddy Holloway Chris Nix and me, Alex Grundon, on Instagram. You can follow at LT Museum on Instagram, and you're on YouTube right now. Leave comments below, subscribe so you know when the next episode's coming up. And I apologise profusely for not saying that before. But what is that G? Did you spot the G? Did you spot the S? We want to know what those letters mean in those stations. I'm racking my brains. I've got no idea. Team doesn't know either. If you know or can come up with a suggestion, leave a message below.
There you go. All right, next photo. Now, I know you love tiles, Alex.
Look
I had
at
to throw this one in there. Now
tell us where this is and what this is.
This is one of my favourite parts of our discovery at Euston. So, I mean, this must have been quite a few years ago now, Chris. It would have been 2016 we discovered this. Now, we were always wondering, because, of course, the bank branch of the Northern Line was an island platform. And now if you go down to the south, as we mentioned before, the southbound bank branch of the Northern Line at Euston, it's just a really wide platform because they basically filled in the northbound side of that island platform and kind of rerouted it around the Victoria Line. So we're always wondering, so where are the remnants of the passenger tunnels that used to belong to the City and South London side? Because of course they had lifts and an emergency spiral staircase to get into the station from 1907. And we kind of had this sort of route around. We had the help of a brilliant area manager at the time who kind of came with us and showed us some bits. Something that he was like, well, I mean, we have this other tunnel. I don't know whether that's of interest. And he took us up there. And the first thing that Chris and I spot are all of these beautiful, albeit quite dirty, white tiles everywhere, which we quickly realized were glass tiles, which are quite unusual and only really used by the City and South London Railway. And then we found that tile in situ, which is a maker's tile, only one of its kind. I mean, we've talked about maker's tiles back 2 weeks ago in our Euston episode, our Down Street episode. Sorry.
Yeah, Simpson and Moores or Woolliscroft, or all of those companies that made the epic numbers of tiles for the London Underground. This is unique, isn't it? Totally. And look at the narrowness of that tile.
Oh yeah, and it's so delicate and thin. And then, so we obviously left it in situ because that's where it belonged. And then I think it must have been 2 years later at least, or at least a year and a half later, I was up there taking some of our guides around to do some training, and I walked into that part of the station and I saw tile on the floor completely, well, not completely, but quite badly broken. So I called Chris and said, Chris, oh my God, the tile's broken.
It's down there, it's down there.
Yeah, and Chris went and spent 2 hours, I believe, kind of piecing it together and taking all the bits of it. And my hero, and that now is in the museum collection, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, look at that.
Now,
that was it.
This photo shows it after we'd restored it. So I as soon as City called me, I rushed straight to Euston with some bags and some packing materials. And the City said, I think it was actually about 2.5 hours, because it was, I was grubbing around in the fluff and the grime, and some of the lettering was really almost just powder on the ground. And I knew even for a skilled glass conservator that was going to be a huge amount of work. The London Transport Museum Friends funded the restoration of that tile, which was, it took a skilled conservator about a week to rebuild that into what you see there, and it is now on display. When the museum reopens, you can go and see it.
It's lovely, and it's so lovely of you to do that and to actually restore it. Thank you so much. What else have we got, City?
All right, so here we've got some. Chris, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. So this is a diagram from our collection, or at least part of a diagram from our collection. The full thing is a massive A0 diagram. And it was a set of plans that were produced for that widening of the City in South London that I mentioned earlier between 1922 and 1924. And they were pushing on from north from Euston, and that bit there is part of the old terminus arrangement. I think it's the only one. it's a travelator a traverser for the locos of the City and South London Railway. We have number 13 at the museum at Covent Garden. They're very short locomotives, just designed to pull 3 cars. And rather than have a reversing loop, which we talked about in previous episodes, where they could run the train round and send it south again, they would uncouple the locomotive, run it off the end of the platform into that short piece of tunnel, slide it from the northbound track to the southbound, and then run the loco round via a set of crossover points to the other end of the train, ready to pull it back south again.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So train comes in on the bottom line, gets shunted across on that traverser, and then you've got me doing it now. And and then the train goes out on the top line, and that's how it used to work. So that's how you used to turn the trains around. Amazing, amazing.
Now, next one. This is now a part of the station which unfortunately is out of bounds for us. There you go, little pun there. But this is in the this is in the Melton Street building that is now due for demolition because of HS2. But what we're looking at there is a giant fan that sits on top of the old lift shaft that would have taken passengers from the street level down to the Charing Cross Euston Hampstead Railway, or the Charing Cross branch of the Northern Line. And this giant fan used to make this kind of quite a loud noise, and we used to take people in there to be able to have a little look at it. So that entire building, the station building, since its closure in 1914, has been operating as a ventilation shaft for the Northern Line. So that fan is simply helping to extract some hot air from the Northern Line below. So there are still some passageways, if you do dare to kind of climb down or get down into that ventilation shaft, that are still, you know, the original Melton Street side of the line. So you see
cream and blue, is it? Yeah, look at that. I knew you were going to do this. I had this hope that you'd do this. Cream and blue, there it is. Beautiful cream and blue.
It's really quite lovely, and they've made some alterations to that side, so it's incredibly difficult to get to, and quite unpleasant to be in, because of course, being an active ventilation shaft, it's very dusty. You have to wear a full kind of Tyvek suit. You've got to wear a mask. You know, you've got to really kind of put on full PPE, as many of us already, you know.
Yes, very aware of that, if you can get it.
Yeah, exactly. So you see that there, and you've also got remains of the old emergency staircase.
You're spoiling us now. Look at that. Give me a J cloth.
I know. It's really quite beautiful, I think. Now, this is one of the very interesting parts of that side of the station. I believe, Chris, is this still your phone lock screen photo?
It is.
Did City stopper?
So we went down to this bit to take a photo for the Hill London book. It's one of my favourite photos, and it has, as City said, remained my my lock screen ever since. The reason for that is really unusual. It's part of the ventilation system over the Northern Line, and that is the end of a tunnel closed out properly with bespoke cast iron tunnel segments. I've not seen another one, and the thing that I love most, you might see in that round bit in the centre, there's a tiny bit of white writing, and it says "Do not remove." which made me laugh when I first saw it, because it's all that's holding back the soil. So it's it would be very difficult to remove it, but yeah, it's a very, very sage bit of advice. Don't remove it. Normally, what they would do at the end of a tunnel is just dump a huge amount of concrete into the ground for many meters. But it's really unusual to see a beautifully, properly closed out piece of tunnel like that.
And the funny thing about it is, though, Chris, we've had this conversation before, because we would love to know where that tunnel could have gone. It's so bizarre to think that a tunnel is properly finished off. So could there be something the other side of it? We don't know. Could it have been going somewhere that they decided that they would stop? We don't know. I just love the possibilities.
It looks like a bank vault or something.
Yeah.
I think it's as simple as it's a very short piece of extra tunnel that was created for ventilation. He didn't need to go any further. Closing it out like that means they didn't have to dig a bit further in order to put concrete into it. So I think it's just simply made it the shortest possible tunnel they could build.
Lovely. Thank you, Siddy.
There you go. Now, some more beautiful posters. West Side Story, which was a favourite of mine when I was a kid. Absolutely loved that. And there we have also a photo from Gavin, which is of the bricked up entrances into the lift shaft at Euston. So behind those bricks is actually another ventilation shaft. Now, I love the symmetry of this photo, don't you?
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, yeah, anything with a tile, I'm eating out your hand, darling. I'm loving it, loving it, loving it, loving it.
And there we go.
Thank you very much. So this is the bit that I love about this tour, because this is where it all gets exciting. We've had two lines, they become one, that's the Northern Line. And then in the early 1960s, 1962, Central Line's just got its nice shiny new trains from Metra Camel. The Victoria Line starts being dug at Euston, but it's tricky, as Chris can tell us.
So the Victoria Line comes to Euston in 1968. The opportunity was taken to add some much needed ventilation into the station and to give it decent escalators. So it's remodeled, but in quite an awkward space under the ground, under the station. They have to do quite a lot of work to get the station to flow correctly. And one of the things that they do take the opportunity to do is to get cross-platform transfer between the Northern Line and the Victoria Line. So that's why if you come into, say, platform 6, which was that island platform that we saw earlier, it's now a suspiciously wide platform because they diverted the northbound Northern Line out of that tunnel, made it a very wide platform, and cut some new passageways through into the Victoria Line so that you can cross between the southbound Northern Line and the southbound Victoria Line. And then that rerouted Northern Line platform for the northbound is also alongside the northbound Victoria Line. So they managed to make the flow of the station work a lot better by not making people have to go through additional long passageways to get between the different lines when they interchange there.
I love the idea as well that Euston is one of those stations that actually punishes you for overshooting. So if you were trying to get off at Camden Town and you end up at Euston, you actually have to do quite a circuitous route to go back on the Northern Line back to Camden Town. And the other thing I really love about Euston is when you look at the joys and delights of the travelling north on the Bank branch, you leave King's Cross. So when you get on the train, stand by the glass by the door on the right-hand side. So the platform is right beside you. Go and move, carry on, go do what you do. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the tunnel peel off, which was the original City and South London Railway tunnel. You'll swing left, you'll go to Euston, and then you'll carry on towards Camden Town. And all of a sudden, you'll see the old tunnel appear on your right-hand side. It's absolutely amazing.
Always pays when you're on the tube just to keep looking out the windows if you're interested in these spaces, because you will see these little flashes where a tunnel disappears or there's a bit of light for a passageway that used to be used, or a railway tunnel. Yeah.
I love it. Let's have a little chat with David Bownes, our poster supremo, about some of the highlights that are down there at Euston Station. Thanks very much, by the way, David, for coming and joining us for this. We couldn't really have done this without you. So I gather you've got our little poster gallery as well.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, it's based on the sort of poster which you see in the disused tunnels there.
All right.
Oh, this is good, David. Talk us through this.
So this poster is by the same guy that did that Blue Pullman image. And you can see they're very sort of literal depictions of trains in the landscape. This particular one, which would have been at Euston Station, this poster at the time, it's the last gasp of steam. The ones you see at Euston Station on the tour are for more modern diesel locomotives. It's the same artist, a guy called Euston.
I love it.
And here's another, again, sort of triumphing this the arrival of a modern diesel locomotive, cleaner, more efficient, more modern, but ultimately doomed as well, and ultimately replaced by electric trains. But this was exactly the sort of things you would have seen in those passenger tunnels, and that blue Pullman poster is part of the suite of advertising that British Railways was doing at this time.
Oh, the Ideal Home Show. Lovely.
Yeah, this is great. There's quite a few posters that we can still see sort of little scraps of them on the wall that are for home improvements, because the 1950s is the real beginning of that sort of interest in the home and in what we call DIY today. This is very nice. It's by a guy called Hans Unger, who was the most prolific poster artist for the Underground for the entire 20th century. And like so many of these modernist designers that we get at this time, he's an emigre, came to Britain just after the war, and really helped to transform British design. So this poster, although it's not, you can't see this particular one on the tour, it's got a very similar aesthetic to some of the remnants that you can see.
Oh, that's good.
This harks back to a much earlier period. Probably the greatest designer to work for the Underground was Edward McKnight Kauffer. He was an American, but sort of English by proxy. And he really is the most significant poster designer to be working in Britain in the 20th century. And this particular poster from the early 1920s is very typical of his style at that time. And you know, sort of must be a $60,000 question for what the Indian Museum is, because it's quite obscure reference today. But that was a London Underground poster that you would have seen in about 1924.
So you could take the Great Northern Piccadilly and Brompton line to South Kensington.
Yes.
Oh, good work.
All right. And with that.
Oh, lovely Lincolnshire town of Woodhall Spa, well known by everybody, obviously.
Indeed. We put this one in to show what a classic railway poster looked like from the 1930s. It's different from what the Underground were doing, but this particular design you would have seen probably at King's Cross rather than Euston. Woodhall Spa was a very high-end retreat in about 1930. It's in Lincolnshire, and then it became very famous as an airbase in the Second World War, the home of the Dam Busters squadron. But in this particular poster, you can see a lady talking to a chap on a horse, and it's all about the sort of glamour of rail travel to Lincolnshire.
I love it.
Nice.
Change at Lincoln St Mark's for, I know too much about the stations of Lincoln, don't I? This is tragic. Beautiful poster.
Nice to see Catherine Ryan move there as well, isn't
it? Good work. Nice band. Nice band and belt.
Yes. I've got some physical posters that I can show.
Go, give us one of those. Give us one. A corky one, the best one.
Okay. I'll show you this one. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is called a panel poster, or sometimes a window sticker. And this is what you would have got in a tube car in the mid-1930s. Sometimes attached to those sort of glass partitions at the end of the seats or above the seats. And this was what the Underground was famous for. This is by a Parisian called Andre Marty, who designed for Vogue. This was the sort of artist that the Underground were getting. Very modernist design, very sort of like an Art Deco aesthetic. And I think, Chris, you've got one of these in your man shed, haven't you?
I do. I do.
The much vaunted man shed.
Because football is currently not allowed, no sporting gatherings, I've gone for Bluebell time, which is just still Bluebell.
It's funny because all I could see was bell time. I thought you were going to give us a ding on your bell.
Well, I mean, we can. I might need more warning, but yes.
Look at that. I love a ding on the bell. David, thank you so much. So much for that. It's wonderful. If we cast our minds now forward to the modern day and what's happening, that beautiful Leslie Green building at Euston is being pulled down. And who knows where that might end up. I don't know, maybe in years to come. Maybe, Chris, what do you reckon? A few of those tiles might end up at the London Transport Museum?
Yeah, we have asked that some of them are taken down carefully for collection. Yeah.
And I love the fact that at this time in the Hidden London Hangouts, I get the chance to say to Laura, "Go on, give us a bit, something ethereal. What's your favourite bit about that station?" I've got so many. I love it.
Yeah, do you know what? I've got quite a few as well, and I'm probably going to be a little bit greedy and go for 2, if that's all right.
Push can.
The first one is the door moment, if that's even a thing. Let's make it a thing. The door moment.
Yeah.
So obviously on a lot of our tours, we go behind a door at some point on the tour. So we've had quite a few iterations of this tour because we've had to, like I said before, we've had to roll with quite a lot of changes above ground. So it takes the group quite a while to get to to platform 6. And then once you're there, I mean, for me, the door's quite unassuming, it's quite discreet. And so I know what's behind it, and I get quite excited for the group because, you know, that kind of the key, you know, it clicks, the door opens, and I know behind it you've got areas of, you know, kind of quite a contrast actually, because you have the kind of black and white dusty areas, and then around the corner you've got, you know, the posters and the cables and the colour. So there's quite a lot of light and shade, and you move through these different areas, and I really love that. For me, that kind of door open moment, and that's about to be witnessed by people.
It's superb. That bit, and I love, what I really love about that, and I totally get you on that one, is you're standing on a platform and there is a red, white and blue modern tube train from 1996 flies past you. You open one door and you go back 80 years. It is the most phenomenal time warp, isn't it? And it's so stark because of modern to your right and really old straight in front of you. It's phenomenal.
I'm so glad that you get that, because sometimes it's really hard to articulate the experience or the emotion or kind of, you know, how it makes you feel on the tours. And I try and do it, but I know sometimes it might not come across as I intend. And then quickly, my second moment is the whale's belly that I tried to explain before. There's not many places on our tours where you get such a great view of a tunnel, and you ascend one way and you go over to the vent shaft, and then on the way back you descend it. And I just think it's such a lovely moment of taking the group kind of further deeper into the tour, and then they get this really exciting vent shaft. And then you come back and you go past the lift shaft, and I just love that moment as well. That's really important.
Standing in that lift shaft and looking up, and you know that right above you is a platform of Euston
It's
Main Line
huge,
Station. It's
isn't it?
amazing.
It's a huge lift
It's
shaft.
amazing. I love it. That station is for me a total gem. I love being there. As I've said many, many times before, I'm now boring myself with it. Team, thank you so very much, Laura, Siddy, Chris, and also to David, for just giving us that wonderful romp through Euston Station. Everybody should romp through Euston Station. We have, as always, notes, queries and questions from you lovely people. Usual drill, follow at LT Museum on Insta. Follow me, Alex Grundon, Chris Nix, and also Siddy Holloway on Insta, if you so wish. On YouTube, make sure you subscribe and make sure you comment below. If you've got questions, comments, queries, compliments, whatever, drop them below. We read them, we love them, and we always respond to them. We've got some from this week as well. Chris on Insta, this is one actually for David. When were posters and adverts first displayed on the tube?
They used poster advertising right from the beginning. So if we're talking about the deep tube, they had posters right from the start for commercial advertising and for the railway companies itself. But it became much more professionalised in the 1920s with tiled areas for tubes in particular, for posters, and sort of a more modern type of hoarding, but right from the beginning.
I love it, absolutely love it. Another question here from Tiora on YouTube this time. A fan of the London Underground from Estonia here. Hello, Tallinn. I have a question about literature and the tube. You talked about movies having been filmed there, but have you got any information about different works of fiction where the setting is the London Underground? My favourite is Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. The reason I became fascinated by the tube, even before my first visit to London in 2007. I know that Ben Aronovich is describing a lot of nooks and crannies, good use, Estonian English, this is good, of the underground system is his Rivers of London series. Are there any other works of a fan of the tube should definitely read? So are there any others that a fan of the Tube should definitely read. Anyone buzz in?
Yeah. They go back quite a long way. The first one that I think I read was covering subsurface, so district and metropolitan line is, well, I forget the author, but it's Raffles the amateur cracksman, sort of a Victorian gentleman thief. And he uses the Tube to go around and rob wealthy people's houses and then go and play cricket, which is interesting. And then there's one of the later Sherlock Holmes books called, I think it's the Bruce Partington Adventure, something like that. Or no, Bruce Partington Plans, I think. There's a body found beside the track at Aldgate, and the mystery unfolds from there. But then bringing it up to date, the other one that springs to mind, we did Clapham South in a recent episode. And there is a fiction book called Deep Shelter by Oliver Harris, which takes the premise that all of the kind of Cold War era structures are connected. There's not true in our case at Clapham, but yes, it's quite a good romp, that book.
I love this. Sorry, darling, go for it.
I was going to just add, which is I think is quite good because it connects to Down Street, which we did 2 weeks ago. There's an Agatha Christie that also takes place in Hyde Park Corner Station, which is with the death of a passenger. It's the man in the brown suit. So if you love your Agatha Christie's, definitely read that one as well.
I love that. And speaking of, we were talking about Clapham South a minute ago. Claudio Cabral Diaz, I love your name. Can I swap? He says, very cool and interesting episode, guys. Thanks for the awesome material about Clapham South and keeping us entertained and informed at the same time. Take that one for the team. Well done, everybody. I'm actually a tunnel design engineer, and I visited Clapham South Deep Shelters last year and found the tunnels quite a remarkable piece of London and tunnelling history. I enjoyed this, especially to learn about its use during World War II and hopefully its conversion in the near future. Quick question, though. The H-shaped tunnel, is it the cross-cut, cross-passageway connecting the shelter-long tunnels? Is it a cross passageway?
Yeah, both of the cross passages are the figure of 8 tunnels. So well done.
Love that.
Right. Yeah.
And finally, Mark Smith, also on YouTube. Have you made your? Oh, I love this. This is where people are really watching this. Oh, I just love it. Mark Smith, hello. Have you made your own station name inserts for the LT Museum Underground Lightbox? Or are they commercially available? Right. Okay. So my one is just normal. Chris's is not. In fact, there's not much that's normal in Chris, to be fair. Chris and I are far sadder than you might imagine. But yours are very funky, aren't they?
So it was literally the week before lockdown. I just commissioned a set of inserts for roundels for our tour sites, so that when you arrive, you have a light box with the station names on. And it was just really fortuitous. The last day I was in the office, I picked up the pack, and there's only one set of them. I happen to have given one of the Hidden London ones to Siddy, which is why you will see that on her.
I want one. I
want one too.
I was lucky. I caught him just before the lockdown and got one. So
that's nice, isn't it?
Very, very fortuitous.
I am cooped up with the only set currently in the world of these ones for Aldwych, Charing Cross, Clapham.
You know what? I think you deserve this, Chris. I think you deserve this. Follow Chris Nix on Instagram and send him a private message if you would consider getting them. All right, because he won't make them if there's no demand. But if there is, ping him a message and let him know. Let's hope you get deluged. This would be great. Finally, Chris, this is one for me and you. You'll love this. There was a message that came in about a previous episode from Chris Hessian. Hello, Chris. He says, I want to know how long it really took for you to record, as if, the greasing flanges section in order to make it look like one seamless discussion. It was a seamless discussion.
I'm not sure what he means.
No, nor do I.
It's just a technical question.
And you grease them and then they don't squeak.
That's right. Yeah.
And then we have to leave it. So follow LT Museum on Instagram, Chris Nix, City Holloway, and me, Alex Grundon, on Instagram as well. You can follow us on YouTube, which is what you're doing now. Subscribe, comment, and let us know what you think of them. And coming up are some more amazing, amazing locations. We've been downstairs a lot in the last few episodes. We're going sky high in the next one. Have yourself a great day and stay safe.